wedding reception sparkled with golden lights and echoed with laughter and conversation. A young woman entered quietly, holding her small son's hand tightly. Guests whispered behind their champagne glasses. A single mother at a wedding? How awkward. She kept her head down, silently enduring their judgment. But when the groom stepped up to speak, the entire room fell silent, and then erupted in tears that no one saw coming. Sarah Miller, 28, stood at the entrance of the elegant ballroom, her hand protectively holding her 6-year-old son, Ethan's, small fingers. Her simple navy dress was the nicest thing she owned, purchased from a discount store after saving for months. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and despite her exhaustion from working 2 jobs, she'd made sure both she and Ethan looked presentable for this special occasion. Sarah cleaned offices in the early morning hours before Ethan woke up, then worked as a cashier at the local grocery store while he was in school. Every penny went toward rent, groceries, and the small savings account she was building for Ethan's future. There was never money for luxuries like new clothes or fancy dinners, but Sarah had learned to find joy in simple moments with her son. When the wedding invitation had arrived from her old high school friend Emma, Sarah had almost declined. She didn't belong in this world of expensive venues and designer dresses, but Ethan had been so excited when she'd shown him the invitation, asking if he could wear his fancy shirt, a white button-down she'd found at a thrift store. "Will there be cake, Mommy?" he'd asked with the enthusiasm that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Now standing in the doorway of the country club ballroom, Sarah wondered if she'd made a mistake. The other guests were clearly wealthy. The women wore jewelry that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year, and the men discussed business deals and vacation homes with casual ease. As they found their assigned table in the back of the room, Sarah overheard the whispered comments from nearby guests. "Is that Sarah Miller? I heard she never married the father. Poor thing, raising a child alone. She must be struggling. I wonder why Emma invited her. She's so out of place here." Ethan, despite being only 6, picked up on the tension. He squeezed his mother's hand and whispered, "Mommy, are we in the wrong place? These people seem mean." Sarah's heart ached for her son, who was already learning that the world could be unkind to people like them. "No, sweetheart," she whispered back, forcing a smile. "We belong here." Emma wanted us to come celebrate with her, but as they sat at their table, placed far from the wedding party and filled with other guests who seemed equally out of place among the wealthy crowd, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged for every choice she'd made since becoming a single mother. In her purse, she carried a small photo of her and Ethan taken at the park last summer, both of them laughing as they fed ducks by the pond. It was her reminder that despite everything, they were a family, small but complete, struggling but loving. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself increasingly isolated. The other guests at her table made polite conversation, but she could sense their discomfort when she mentioned working multiple jobs or living in a small apartment across town. When Ethan accidentally knocked over his water glass while reaching for a dinner roll, Sarah quickly cleaned it up, acutely aware of the disapproving looks from nearby tables. "Some people just don't know how to control their children," she heard one woman mutter to her companion. Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she simply helped Ethan dry his hands and whispered reassurance that accidents happen. She learned long ago that defending herself often made situations worse, so she'd developed a thick skin and a quiet dignity that carried her through difficult moments. What Sarah didn't notice was that someone had been watching their table throughout the evening. David Carter, 32, the groom, had spotted her the moment she'd entered the ballroom. At first, he'd thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Sarah Miller, sitting quietly in the back of his wedding reception, looking exactly as kind and gentle as she had in high school 15 years ago. David's new wife, Emma, was busy greeting guests and posing for photos, but his attention kept drifting to the young woman who had once been one of his closest friends. Sarah probably didn't even remember their friendship. She'd been quiet even then, the kind of person who helped others without expecting recognition or thanks. But David remembered everything. He remembered how Sarah had shared her lunch with him during his sophomore year, when his father had lost his job and there wasn't always food at home. How she tutored him in English when he was struggling, never making him feel stupid or ashamed. how she'd been the only person to attend his father's funeral when he died suddenly during their senior year, sitting quietly in the back of the church and offering a simple, "I'm sorry for your loss," that had meant more than all the flowers and casseroles combined. Most importantly, David remembered the conversation they'd had the day before graduation, when he'd been ready to give up on college because he couldn't afford it. Sarah had looked at him with those same warm brown eyes and said, "You have to keep going, David. Someday someone is going to need you to be the person you're meant to become." Those words had gotten him through 4 years of college on scholarships and student loans, through the long nights of building his business, through every moment when he'd wanted to quit. And now, watching Sarah gently wipe Ethan's face and whisper encouragement when he felt embarrassed about the spilled water, David realized that someone had needed her to become exactly who she was, a mother who loved unconditionally and taught by example. As the dinner service ended and the evening moved toward speeches, David made a decision that would surprise everyone in the room, including his new wife. He'd planned to give a traditional thank you speech, acknowledging family and friends for their support. But seeing Sarah sitting quietly while others whispered about her circumstances had stirred something deep in his memory, a sense of justice and recognition that had been dormant for too long. When the DJ handed him the microphone and the room quieted for his speech, David's eyes found Sarah's across the crowded ballroom. She was helping Ethan with his dessert, completely unaware that she was about to become the center of attention. "Good evening, everyone," David began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate with Emma and me. Before I thank my family and wedding party, I need to tell you about someone who changed my life." The room settled into polite attention, expecting the usual sentimental wedding speech. But David's next words would transform the evening in ways no one anticipated. 15 years ago, I was a scared teenager who thought his life was over," David continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "My father had just died. We had no money, and I was ready to drop out of school and give up on every dream I'd ever had." The ballroom had grown completely silent. Emma, standing beside him in her elaborate wedding gown, looked puzzled but supportive. Sarah, still unaware that she was the subject of his speech, had stopped helping Ethan with his dessert and was listening with growing recognition. "There was one person who refused to let me give up," David said, his eyes now locked on Sarah's across the room. "She shared her lunch with me when I was too proud to admit I was hungry. She helped me with my homework when I was falling behind. And on the day I decided to quit school, she looked me in the eye and said something that changed everything." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as she realized where this was going. Around her, guests were beginning to turn in their seats, following David's gaze to the quiet woman in the back of the room. "She told me that I had to keep going because someday someone would need me to be the person I was meant to become." David's voice grew stronger, more emotional. "That person was Sarah Miller, and she was right. The person who needed me to become who I am today is sitting right there." He pointed directly at Ethan, who looked up from his cake with wide, curious eyes. "That little boy needed his mother to be the strongest, most selfless person I've ever known. And tonight, instead of celebrating her incredible strength and love, I've watched some of you whisper about her circumstances, judge her choices, and treat her like she doesn't belong here." The room was so quiet that the sound of Sarah's quiet sobs could be heard from several tables away. Guests who had been making snide comments earlier now looked ashamed, their faces flushed with embarrassment. "Sarah Miller is a single mother who works 2 jobs to support her son," David continued, his voice rising with passion. "She's raising a polite, kind, intelligent little boy on her own, and she's doing it with more grace and dignity than most people show when they have every advantage in the world." Ethan, sensing that something important was happening, climbed onto his mother's lap and hugged her tightly. Sarah was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the public recognition and the flood of memories from their high school friendship. "You want to know what real wealth looks like?" David asked the room. "It looks like a mother who saves for months to buy her son a nice shirt for a wedding. It looks like working 2 jobs and still finding energy to help with homework and read bedtime stories. It looks like teaching your child kindness and respect, even when the world doesn't show you the same courtesy." Emma, finally understanding the significance of the moment, took the microphone from her new husband. "Sarah," she called out, her voice carrying across the ballroom, "I'm so sorry. I should have made sure you felt welcome tonight, You were always the kindest person in our class, and I should have remembered that." The room erupted in spontaneous applause, led by an elderly woman at the front table, who stood up and began clapping enthusiastically. One by one, other guests rose to their feet, their earlier judgment replaced by admiration and shame for their previous behavior. David left the head table and walked through the ballroom to where Sarah was sitting, tears streaming down her face as Ethan patted her back comfortingly. The little boy looked up at David with the solemn expression children wear when they sense adults are having important emotions. "Are you the man who remembers my mommy?" Ethan asked quietly. "Yes, buddy," David replied, kneeling beside their table. "Your mommy is one of the most important people I've ever known. She taught me how to be strong, and she's teaching you the same thing." David pulled a boutonniere from his lapel, a small white rose that matched the bridal party's flowers, and gently pinned it to Ethan's shirt. "This makes you part of the wedding party," David said solemnly, "because both of you are family to me, and family always belongs." The transformation in the ballroom was immediate and profound. Guests who had whispered cruel comments earlier in the evening now approached Sarah's table with genuine apologies and introductions. The woman who had criticized Ethan's behavior brought him a special dessert from the kitchen and complimented his good manners. Business cards were pressed into Sarah's hands by guests who owned companies and were genuinely interested in her work ethic and character. "I run a daycare center," one woman told Sarah. "If you're ever interested in working with children full-time, I'd love to talk to you. The way you handle your son shows real skill." Emma, free from her receiving line duties, spent the rest of the evening at Sarah's table, catching up on 15 years of life and apologizing repeatedly for not staying in better touch. "I got so caught up in my own world," she admitted. "I forgot about the people who actually mattered." But the most significant change was in David himself. Throughout the evening, he found excuses to check on Sarah and Ethan, bringing them extra cake, making sure Ethan had activities to keep him entertained, and generally behaving like the protective friend he should have been all along. "You don't have to take care of us," Sarah told him during a quiet moment while Ethan was dancing with other children on the dance floor. "Tonight has been more than enough. I never expected—" "I should have found you years ago," David interrupted. "When Emma told me she was inviting you, I should have called, should have made sure you knew how welcome you were. I let success make me forget the people who helped me get here." Over the following weeks, David and Emma made good on their promises to stay in touch. David helped Sarah find a better-paying job at his company, not as charity, but because her organizational skills and work ethic were exactly what his growing business needed. Emma introduced Sarah to other mothers in their social circle, women who welcomed her genuine warmth and down-to-earth perspective. Most importantly, Ethan gained an extended family of people who valued his mother and, by extension, adored him. David taught him to play catch in the backyard. Emma helped Sarah enroll him in better programs at school, and gradually their small family of two expanded into a community of support and love. "I used to worry that Ethan was missing out by not having a traditional family," Sarah confided to David one evening as they watched their children play together. Emma and David now had a little girl of their own, but I think he's learning something even more valuable. "What's that?" David asked. "That family isn't about blood or circumstances. It's about people who choose to love and support each other." 1 year later, at a charity fundraiser organized by David and Emma's Foundation for Single Parents, David took the microphone once more. Sarah sat at the head table this time, recognized as the program coordinator who had helped dozens of families find stability and hope. "Last year at my wedding, people laughed at a single mother who dared to attend our celebration," David said, looking directly at Sarah. "Tonight, that same woman has helped create a foundation that supports families just like hers. She taught me that strength isn't about what you have, it's about what you give." Sarah wiped away tears of joy as the audience rose in thunderous applause. Never underestimate a single mother's strength, because behind every quiet sacrifice lies the power to change the world, one act of love at a time.